Okay, and welcome back, students who are taking financial accounting. And in this series of videos, we are working on the assigned homework problems from the digital study guide for Chapter 11, the Group B exercises. Note, accounting is about understanding the concepts and then applying that understanding to the situation at hand. If you get the application aspect wrong, that is one thing and is easily remedied by watching someone else work the problems. However, if you don't understand the concepts, that is a whole other thing. Watching a problem worked out will not help if you don't understand the underlying concepts. Go back and study the text material again and watch the theory videos. If you still don't understand the concepts, then either email or telephone an instructor to get help with that understanding. Now, as I glance down at problem exercise 11-28B, I saw that we are going to need to prepare a statement of cash flows using the direct method. Okay. The amount of time it takes to do this problem is 20 to 25 minutes. If I were doing it myself without explanations or whatever have you, it'd probably take me a little bit less time, but realize it is an involved process and it's going to take some time. So therefore, I highly recommend that you definitely work through the short exercises for this chapter, because those exercises built your skill set one upon the other in order to be able to quote unquote create the statement of cash flows. And with that said, what I'm not going to do is I'm not going, as I had done one of those statements previously, it took me a long time, and my handwriting wasn't very good. Again, I was talking about, these are my working papers, so I'm going to be taking shortcuts by abbreviating things like this. And I had said, if you want to see the formal statement, I work on my working papers, I get the information, and then I convert it over into the proper document with all the correct formatting. And in this, this is no different in this case here. In that other document, we're creating an indirect, using the indirect method. This one we're using the direct method, but it takes a lot of time for me to be writing everything down. All right, and I have, I have just time constraints. So instead of rewriting everything here, I've just reproduced the solution. Now I'll work through it so that we understand where things are coming and going, but I'm just saving myself the time of having to write everything out, and it also looks a lot better than what I had done in that particular exercise. So with that said, it says the income statement and additional data for Snyder Services is here, and this is the additional data. And what it has here, so we have our income statement, we're familiar with that, and then it says additional data, which is like collection from customers, payments to suppliers, payments to employees, dividend revenue, expense and income tax, equal their cash amounts, acquisition of fixed assets, proceeds from the sale, proceeds of insurance, issuance of common stock, payment of long-term note payable, payment of dividends, and the cash balance, right? And then it says prepare the statement using the direct method. So here's the statement with the direct method, and the flow that I go through when I'm doing this is: one, I create the heading, all right? Then two, I will section off my operating activities, my investing activities, and my financing activities, and then lastly I put the net increase or decrease in cash. And remember, the financing activities and the investing activities sections, and therefore the net increase in cash, this here whole section is basically the same as when you're creating a statement using the indirect method. However, the operating activity section is very different from the indirect method. So once I've created this structure, I will, in the operating activity section, I will come along and say, create my receipt section and my payment section, right? And realizing that all I'm going to have is just a total receipt and a total cash payment, right? Now, once I've got that structure set up, now I'm going to go and fill in the individual activities that are required for each one of those sections. Okay. And then down here, I will lastly fill out my, put in my balances so that I have my balance, my cash balance at the end of that accounting period. Right. So that's how I go about doing it. All right. So if, 1, I create the heading. 2, I write in the words cash flows from operating activity. 3, I write in the words, I leave space, write in those words, cash flow from investing activity. I leave space, write in the words, cash flows from financing activities. Leave space, write in net increase in cash, and I realize that I leave some more space at the bottom of the page. Now, once I've got those 4 major sections, and I realize that's number 5, then I come back up here to my operating activities and I write in the words receipts, total cash receipts, payments, and total cash payments. And then it's just a matter of, again, looking at my information, right, and pulling that information. So the first thing I need is collection from customers, right, of $15,000. There it is. I'm sorry, collection from customers. What's that say? Nope. Collection from customers are 15,000 more than sales. So my sales are 275 plus my 15, so that's my 290,000, which I put on the statement of cash flows. Next, dividends received. Let's see here. Payment of dividends is, let's see here. Right there, dividend revenue, $11,000. That goes there. Right, and those are my only receipts from my operating activities, so we end up with a total of 301. Now I go back and I look at my payments to suppliers, and that is, let's see here, payments to suppliers are the sum of the cost of goods sold plus the advertising expense. So my cost of goods sold is 103 and my advertising expense is 7, so that is 110,000. I write it in. Now to employees, payments to employees are $18,000 more than salaries expense. So what's my salary expense? 45. So 45,000 plus my 18,000 gives me 63,000, and that's what I put for my payments to employees. Right there. Okay, for income tax, I have $12,000 for my income tax expense. So there's the 12,000. For interest, I have the interest expense of $7,000. And so that's what goes there. And so my total cash payments ends up being 192,000. And of course, those two numbers total up to 109,000. Now, as I was doing this, and I had said this in one of the previous exercise videos, yeah, I have this solution in front of me, and I'm just running down this list because, I have it in front of me. I know what's coming next. But realize that this should be blank, okay? And you go back to, quote unquote, the template, that checklist, from the exhibit that's in your textbook, all right? Or go back to, the reporting video in the theory section, all right? And what it shows is, everything that's here as almost a checklist so that you can go down through that particular checklist and you look for the particular items that go under each and every section. All right. So I just wanted you to be aware of that. It's not as simple as this looks, as what I'm doing is I'm just going down through my solution. Well, you don't have, if you're out in the workplace, you don't have the solution. So what do you rely upon? What you rely upon is, that exhibit from the textbook, or watch the reporting video, and you'll see the template that you can use to use as quote unquote a checklist, so that as you go down through it, like for payments, you'll see, you start out 2 suppliers is the first activity that you should look at. You should look at the second activity, 2 employees. The next one is income tax. And if you don't have one of those activities on your checklist that are part of the data that's given, well, you have to think about the cash ramifications and figure out where to put it. If it's in your checklist but not here, right? Because remember, no 2 businesses are alike. They're not going to have everything in a cookie cutter, step by step, exactly the way it should, exactly the way you're looking at it method. All right, you have to be able to think through this information. It's not hard. You're following a process, you're following a procedure, but you do have to make distinctions when you're deciding what to include in the data. Okay. So if I was going to do investing activities next, all right, and I wasn't looking at the homework, the solution to it, I'd look under, what I have for the direct method. What would I look at for investing activities? Well, I would have to look at acquisitions of, fixed assets. All right, and based upon all the data we're given here, I mean, obviously acquisition of fixed assets doesn't show up on my income statement. So if I look at my additional data here, I see I have an acquisition of fixed assets for cash of $87,000. So I would come over to my blank, my working, what I'm working on, statement of cash flows, and I would add the $87,000 in. And the same thing would be for the proceeds for the sale of land. I could go down through my checklist and see that, you have to take into consideration the proceeds from the sale of land, and that's for $19,000. Okay. Well, if I sold the land, all right, that means I got cash for it. So that's a plus 19,000. The acquisition of fixed assets means we bought the fixed assets, so that's why it's a minus 87,000, because it's cash going out. Always keep in the back of your mind, what the effect on the cash is. Yeah, we're describing these activities over here, but over here we're putting what the net effect on the cash is. Okay, so the total of our cash flows from investing activities is a negative 68,000. We come down to the proceeds from the issuance of common stock, and we have that here for G, and it tells us it's 50,000. So the 50,000 goes here. The payment of long-term notes payable is here for 15,000, and that goes here. Now notice again, this is proceeds from the issuance of common stock. When we sell common stock, what happens? We get cash. That's why it's a plus 50,000. But when we have a payment of our long-term note payable, what's happened to our cash position? We're paying out 15,000. We're paying off the note payable. That's why this is a minus 15,000. Again, this just describes the activity, but here is the effect on our cash. Right? Then we have a payment of dividends, right, of 16,000. And those are all of our financing activities, so the total is 19,000. And then we add up the 109 for our operating, negative 68 for our investing, and the 19,000 for our financing, we end up with $60,000. Now the beginning cash balance at 2013 was 11,000, and we increased our cash by 60,000. So our cash balance at the end of 2014 is the $71,000. Okay, and so that's our statement of cash flows. And that only took me 15 minutes to explain versus doing the 20 to 25 minutes of trying to handwrite it all out and being all sloppy and whatever have you. So I know that we're going to have additional statements of cash flows that we're going to have to create, especially in the problem section. Okay, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to do this in the same type or manner where I will give you the solution and explain how the numbers are derived at on the solution. The formatting and creating of it is a step-by-step process. Okay, create your different sections, input your activities and work through the numbers, right? And that's how you end up with your statement of cash flows. And that's the way I'll be going forward for whenever we have to actually create these here statements. And we'll be doing that kind of a lot in the problem section. Okay. So, but for now, we'll have to move on to exercise 11-29, and I'll see you in the next video for that.